Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce now Jack Mitchell, who's Chief of Investigations for the Senate Committee on Aging, chaired by Senator Herb Kohl of Wisconsin. Jack has been in government a long time. He's held a number of high-level career positions. His last position was the executive branch of senior advisor to the director of the National Science Foundation, senior executive service level position they had for 6 years. Prior to that, he worked in congressional oversight for the Department for HHS, and was also a senior executive policy advisor in the Office of the Secretary. He spent 7 years in the FDA Commissioner's Office with David Kessler, a special assistant, and he was particularly involved in the tobacco industry probe, and there's a book called Question of Intent by Dr. Kessler, and he clearly is, throughout the book, having managed that investigation and having lined up all those CEOs before the Senate, swearing that tobacco was not addictive. So with that, I'd like to have Jack come up and talk.
Well, thank you very much. I'm batting cleanup, so I'll try not to take too much of your time. I'm very honored to be in such distinguished medical and ethical and legal company today, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to provide the congressional oversight perspective a little bit on this, and perhaps a bit of the FDA perspective as well, having worked in the Commissioner's office for some time. And I certainly don't disagree with Dr. Green's very entertaining and very well put description of the FDA approval processes, nor do I disagree with his description of the congressional oversight process as often, if not always, being unfortunately driven by scandal and the body count. That unfortunately is what happens often, and what that means is that congressional oversight is often too reactive instead of proactive. And at FDA, I was privileged for a while to have a job with David Kessler, where I ran an office of special investigations for him, and I had a chance to be proactive there because he termed that office as what he wanted me to do, and my small staff was to be what he called an early warning radar, which is to spot problems and spot these type of issues before they become crises or before there is a body count to the extent possible. And so to some respects, that was one of the best jobs I ever had. And it's harder to do that in congressional oversight because there you're dealing, generally speaking, with things that have already happened. And you're dealing with trying to fix something that may already be heavily damaged. But, and I'll tell you just an interesting little aside, you probably never thought of cigarettes as a medical device, but in fact that was the FDA's theory during the tobacco investigation, namely that cigarettes were medical devices and they delivered a drug that was addictive, namely nicotine. So Dr. Kessler and his team's argument before the higher courts was that nicotine was an addictive drug and cigarettes were the medical device that delivered them. Therefore, they were under the jurisdiction of the FDA. Ultimately, we lost that legal fight in the Supreme Court, but it was close. And the important thing is we opened some doors there that can't be closed. And what the tobacco case showed me is what I might highlight today a little bit, which is that these are long struggles, these struggles to improve public policy and to bring more ethics and more oversight into any area. I was never naive enough to believe when I secretly brought Dr. Jeffrey Wigand in to see David Kessler 13 years ago, where he disclosed some of the tobacco industry's most sensitive secrets to Dr. Kessler, including that the industry had been able to learn how to manipulate nicotine levels by adjusting the pH or alkaline levels of the tobacco. I never thought then that, despite that was going to be the end of the fight. Rather, I thought that it was probably the beginning of the fight, and that it would play out over more than a decade or more, and that has turned out to be the way it is, what has happened. So I see that as having a message or a meaning here. I see something here starting today, thanks to Dr. Rosen and so far a relatively small number of his compatriots, and thanks to the efforts of companies like Zimmer, there's going to slow sea change is about to occur in this industry, in the medical device industry, with regard to the transparency under which it operates. This is going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. And I'd have to say as an aside that I want to say that I very much admire Dr. Rosen for taking this on, because it's never easy to challenge the status quo, particularly when your professional peers, to some degree, are going to criticize you. That's never an easy thing to do. When you've done the kind of work I do for so long, I've been an investigative reporter and a Senate investigator on 2 different occasions, and I've run government investigative offices like Dr. Kessler's. I see that, frankly, as doing the same thing, just in different jobs and different roles. When you do that, you realize to some degree that whether you like it or not, whether you care to admit it to yourself or not, that there is a strong reformist streak within you. And so I tend to seek out people who are like that, or see that, and I see that characteristic in them. And so the most important thing you bring to the table when you try to do effective oversight and you try to change public policy is you ferret out the people who are capable and have the courage to do something like that. That's how I found Dr. Jeffrey Wigand and made myself close enough to him that he was willing to come forward to the FDA. When I began our year-long series hearings last year on conflicts of interest and consultant payments in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries, I sought out a young eye surgeon, retinal specialist and eye surgeon from Ohio named Greg Rosenthal. And the reason I invited him to testify at our hearing about these consultant payments was because he helped organize, among a bunch of eye doctors and retinal specialists, a small group called Physicians for Clinical Responsibility. And the reason they had gotten together and decided to put up a website was because they were a lot of young eye specialists who were upset with the ethical standards prevailing in the eye industry, in the medical eye care industry. And he was willing to come forward and speak on behalf of those physicians and doctors to say, this is enough. There's too much pharmaceutical money in my industry. And the reason his testimony was so valuable was because we were getting it from a credible, inside the industry source who was willing to speak for a number of people in his profession who were turned off by what was happening ethically. And so it was not shocking that I was drawn to or found out Dr. Rosen when we were organizing a similar hearing for the oversight of the medical device industry and its conflict of interest and ethics rules when we did our hearing some months ago. And he was brave enough to come forward and testify before what could have been a very hostile audience. And Chad also testified at that hearing, and I might add, did a very credible job under very difficult circumstances, because he was one of only a few industry people who was sort of dragged up before our committee to explain themselves. And I commend Zimmer for taking the lead and trying to take a very large bite out of what has been a long-standing problem for this industry going back a decade or more. And I hope that some of the other companies, both large and small, will follow Zimmer's lead and do some of the things that they're doing. It may be to some extent that they've been forced to do it by the Justice Department's investigation, but that at this point, that's water under the dam. The fact of the matter is that this needs to happen, and there are other parties in the medical device industry and in academia who need to follow that message as well. The large companies aren't the only players. There are a lot of entrepreneurial small companies who are out there spending a lot of money trying to influence physicians and surgeons and draw them into their sphere of influence. There are also a growing number of physician or surgeon-owned medical device entities, which the HHS Inspector General has said in writing they have grave concerns about the economic and managerial construction of those particular firms. And so these are all parts of the same things that the committee continues to explore as we continue our series of 5 or 6 hearings on these type of conflicts, both in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries. And we hope to do some more hearings in the fall and into next year in support of a number of pieces of legislation. We're going to be looking at continuing medical education. We've done a hearing on academic detailing by the pharmaceutical companies. We're going to do some hearings on free drug samples that are given to physicians and medical students and ways to combat that type of influence peddling. And we're going to do some more hearings as necessary on these continuing conflicts in order to deal with them. And most of that is in support of some legislation you've heard about here from several people today called the Physicians Payment Sunshine Act, which is co-authored by my boss, Senator Herb Kohl of Wisconsin, who is chairman of my committee, the Senate Special Committee on Aging, and Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa, the ranking Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, who is very much interested in public health issues and has a very large investigative staff. And so we have a number of Senate co-sponsors for this legislation. Our number one goal, and Chad mentioned this in his own talk, is to increase transparency in this industry. We're not against, certainly trying to, we're not in any way trying to disrupt the necessary and ongoing fruitful relationships between surgeons, physicians, and the medical device industry. We recognize there are some unique relationships there that need to continue. They've resulted in a lot of good medical care for patients, and our goal here is not to disrupt those, but rather to make them more transparent so that they can become more easily understandable to patients, and so there's not so much mystery associated with who's getting what and what influence does that have on the medical care received. Now, at this point, while we've negotiated this bill very closely with industry and with other parties, it's not clear to me what the fate of the bill will be for this year. We've tried to put it into the Senate Medicare package. We haven't been successful with that to date, and it doesn't appear that's going to happen. We may introduce it as a standalone bill with an advisement to industry and those with whom we negotiated that should anyone block the bill's progress, that we will come back next year with more oversight hearings and a much more toughly worded bill that we will be much less willing to compromise over or negotiate. So hopefully you'll be seeing in the news some news about where that legislation stands, either this summer and fall when we try to introduce it by itself, or we may again have to come back with a different version of this bill in the months to come, and if we do, that will be supported by additional oversight hearings that we will hold. Certainly, Senator Kohl is one who does not believe that any of these medical device industry relationships should be disrupted in any serious way. He's a businessman himself. He built a highly successful Kohl department store chain, which you may have heard of, and he owns the Milwaukee Bucks NBA basketball team, which is worth several $100 million. So he knows a lot more about business than most anyone I know, and business CEOs who come into his office thinking they're going to give him some song or dance usually go away unhappy because they find out that Senator Kohl knows a lot more about the business dealings with which they're bringing to him than they may have imagined. So certainly, we're very interested in continuing this type of congressional oversight. We're working closely with the Finance Committee on some aspects of this bill in Senator Grassley's office. And we also hope to introduce with Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, some legislation that would emanate from our academic detailing and free drug sample hearings, which would seek to curtail or reform some of those practices in a way which might make it less likely for physicians or medical students to be influenced by the one-sided or somewhat biased view that they may now be getting when their only source of information comes from the pharmaceutical companies. That does not mean it's bad information. It means that there needs to be more of a neutral perspective, we believe, introduced into that process. And we're going to continue to work towards that eventual goal of improving the quality of information, improving the independence and quality of the information that physicians and medical students and surgeons and academics receive. At the same time, I might note that one thing that academia's role in this needs to be aware of is that Senator Grassley is currently conducting an investigation of whether or not universities who participate in clinical trials, something the previous speaker mentioned, if they are reporting properly, as they are required to do, their outside income from drug and medical device companies. Senator Grassley has already identified some prominent researchers at Harvard and Stanford and elsewhere who have failed to report very large sources of income from drug and medical device companies, as they are required to do. And when I left Washington, NIH and the Senate were working together on legislative language, which was going to address some of the failures of some of the universities to report these outside incomes. I mean, from what I hear this morning, I don't think the University of California at Irvine should have any problem, because I see a lot of attention to ethics and reporting issues here, and obviously this university has a large number of medical ethical experts. And I hope that that attitude will spread more closely out in academia because they are part of this process. Certainly, the research which goes on in our universities around the country is an important part of that medical and scientific process, but they are part of the conflict of interest spectrum as well, and we hope that the university community will understand that and will support the efforts of not only Senator Cole and Grassley, but overall efforts in the Congress to reform some of these conflicts and make it less likely that they will occur as often as they have been in years past. Sorry, I have to put the glasses on for a second. One thing you may wonder, for those of you not very familiar with congressional oversight, is the question of why would the Congress be interested, or why would it be any of Congress's business, the type of ethics issues that we're discussing in the medical device and orthopedic and as well pharmaceutical industries. Well, the reason is that my committee has jurisdiction over Medicare, and most of the medical device companies receive a majority of their income from Medicare and Medicaid in many instances, not in all, but many. In fact, many medical device companies receive the bulk of their income from Medicare reimbursement and Medicaid reimbursement payments. So that provides my committee, at least, with a direct jurisdiction, since we have control of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, in order to make sure and try to be vigilant that our taxpayer dollars, which go into the system, the billions of dollars, are well spent and well protected. And that's been our role in having this year-long series of hearings, was not to embarrass legitimate medical device companies such as Zimmer, but to make sure that they are going to carry through on the reforms that the Justice Department had asked them to undertake. Because again, these involve hundreds of millions, if not billions, of taxpayer dollars, as well as involving important issues relating to proper patient care and good medical outcomes, many of which were described to you by the earlier panel of medical experts in a very impressive way as they discussed the various clinical trial issues that are incumbent on this whole process. So certainly, our role, I believe, is an important one, and our role is to oversight how these industries interact with each other when it involves federal money. And it's, in this day and age, most of, whether we like it or not, most of medical care is funded by the taxpayers, a great deal of it. And so Congress is going to have an increasing role, whether we like it or not, in oversighting how the ethics of these businesses are run, because the federal government is paying the tab for much, if not most of, the reimbursements connected to the pharmaceutical and medical device industries. And so I think that there's going to be a large amount of continuing congressional oversight in these matters. We're very happy to see the reaction to our series of hearings from the industry and from academia. To be honest, I've been in this business a long time, and when we started these hearings last June, I was saying to myself, our chances of really getting any traction with this legislation are pretty small. We're taking on big pharma, and we're taking on some medical device companies, which are very influential and well-funded, and I think that we're probably not going to really get anywhere here. And I was pleasantly surprised when we immediately gained a lot of traction after our first few hearings, and the Sunshine Act got quite a bit of publicity and quite a bit of support, not only in Congress and some reportage in the media, but from industry itself, which I think had realized that some of these payment issues had spiraled a little bit out of control, and to some extent, the influencing which the pharmaceutical companies have been doing was ripe for some reform at least. And so that was our goal when we tackled this issue last year. I'm not naive enough to believe that anything is going to happen overnight. It's going to require many more hearings and many more tough sessions of legislative negotiation with people in industry and academia, as well as my colleagues, the congressional staffers on the Hill. But I think what you're seeing here today is a start. You're seeing somebody within the medical profession, a small group of people, who are standing up and saying, we think this is a little bit out of control. We need more transparency. We need more clarity in the interest of good patient care. And here are some ideas about how we can do this. And I think it's safe to say, well, I don't speak for Senator Cole. I think it's safe to say that our committee applauds that effort. And it's why we gave that effort a focus at our hearing a few months ago on these conflict of interest issues. I must say that we invited some of the more established surgical professional associations to participate or submit written testimony to our hearing, and they declined. So hopefully, I'm hopeful that they will see that the train is leaving the station, and that some of these groups really need to get on board, or at least offer some comment and cooperation in terms of the legislative and other proposals which we've put forward on the table. And perhaps in the months to come, we'll hear more from them. Right now, you're seeing just the start of that effort. I think it's a hopeful start, and certainly it's going to be very interesting to see what else occurs here in the medical device industry with regard to whether the other companies are trying to step up to the plate like Zimmer is doing, because we are going to take a look at the surgeon and physician-owned medical device entities. We've sent letters out to 10 or 12 of these companies asking them who is involved with their companies managerially and how much money each of these physicians or surgeons received. Most of them have already responded. We may have a hearing on that. They are certainly players in this arena, as are the smaller entrepreneurial companies who have certainly have their own issues when it comes to payments to physicians and surgeons. And we fully intend any legislative efforts that we undertake to include all of those players, not just the large companies. And while it's pretty difficult to establish what I might call a level playing field, that is our ultimate goal. We want to establish a regulatory framework that's fair to everybody and includes limits that are not unreasonable for the small companies or for the large companies. And that takes a lot of back and forth and push and shove, and I'm not sure that even the language we have in the legislation now is final or is the final answer to these problems. But like what we're seeing today, it's a step in the right direction. I certainly applaud the university for wishing, for taking these issues on and for being willing to sponsor a forum like this, which attempts to tackle and take head-on ethics issues, which are never easy to grapple with. I think that the fact that there is this hearing today, this seminar today, it says something about this university and says something about its medical school, because I don't see too many events of this nature that try to tackle public policy problems of this magnitude. And I think it's a good sign. I think it's also a good sign that it shows that academia and the medical schools around our country, who also take a tremendous amount of money in medical and scientific grant money from NIH and FDA and elsewhere, that they are aware that they have important, I was gratified to say that they are aware here certainly, that there are important conflict issues that they need to grapple with every day in their clinical trials, in their ethics rules, in their outside payments that they may receive. And I'm gratified to see that those are being taken on by the school in this manner. I don't think that's the case everywhere, and I think Senator Grassley's investigation may show that. We may have a hearing on that investigation and explore what the appropriate role of academia will be and help us to close the circle here and have them as partners as well with the industry and with the congressional players. And with that, I thank you for your time and for having me here this morning, and I'm certainly pleased to answer any questions that might come up after our panel is done. Thank you very much for your time.